Hey everybody, my name is Alex and this is Bento Radio. Now before we get started, I want to give you a very specific thing up front here because next week this whole thing will be transforming a little bit from much of what you expect out of the podcast or the channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, to more of a kind of daily vlog style thing. I hope. I'm not gonna promise anything there because hotel Wi-Fi is a lot. But my point there is that every year when I go to Anime NYC, especially since I've started covering it as part of the press pool, I try to do some sort of daily thing about the show. And now that it's extended to Thursday, I will probably have that first vlog up on Thursday. So it'll be much shorter. It'll probably be in the 15 to 30 minute range instead of the 30 minute to an hour range like these episodes are. But it will be no less valuable, and you'll get a total of 4 of them, one for each day. Probably I try to do one for each day. The scheduling will be a little bit odder than normal. So usually you expect something in the feed around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You will get something probably later because, actually maybe not, I gotta look at the schedule for Thursday because Thursday is an odd day. Thursday and Sunday are technically half days, but they count as full days because convention center nonsense. But anyway, so look forward to that. But if before that you really like the show, be sure to subscribe to it wherever you get your podcast. Or if you're watching here on YouTube, be sure to scroll down to the bottom of the video and hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell, because it will let you know when new episodes drop, which once again you might want for next week, but for the normal cadence of things, these shows come out every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, unless everything lights itself on fire, which happens every once in a while. I'm not in complete control of the universe, sorry. But on that note, let's jump into what we're talking about today. And that's a little show from literally August 5th. And that show is called The Ninth Jedi. So take it away, I, with a plot synopsis.
The Ninth Jedi follows Cara, the daughter of legendary lightsaber smith Lajima, in a distant future where the Jedi Order has nearly disappeared. After her father is captured by the Jedi Hunters, Cara begins training under Jedi Master Juro, who hopes to rebuild the Order. Together with a small group of new Jedi, she travels across the galaxy searching for her father, finding potential allies, and confronting enemies determined to prevent the Jedi from returning. Along the way, Cara is forced to question what it truly means to be a Jedi in a galaxy where the line between light and dark is becoming increasingly complicated.
Okay, now that we've got the plot synopsis out of the way, I want to talk about this because for a bunch of reasons. But the big reason I wanted to talk about this show, and I knew I wanted to talk about this show when it was first announced, although I forgot that it was announced at all because of the way they just unceremoniously kicked it out onto Disney Plus without much warning at all, is because this is a full-length take on one of the original shorts from the first season of Star Wars Visions. By far my favorite Star Wars Visions. I haven't seen all of the second season. I haven't seen any of the third season of the anthology Star Wars Vision series. But by far my favorite of the ones I've seen is still episode 4, season 1, The Bride. And that will play into this, I promise. We'll come back to that. But the reason I want to talk about this was because in doing Star Wars Visions, Disney was engaging in a time-honored tradition of animated anthology series. Think things like Love, Death, and Robots. Think movies like A Short Piece, or Short Piece is the one that always comes up in my head because that's the thing I can think. Or think of the infamous anime thing, Memories, comes from a compilation. It's not just this standalone thing, it is one in a big thing. A great, weird compilation anime film, if you want one, is called Robot Carnival. That thing's wild. I think you can find that on YouTube, even maybe, if I'm not mistaken. But my point is that what Disney did when they decided to do that was to engage with a very specific and storied history of animated compilations. And what they did that was even cooler was they took this huge IP that is borrowing from an intensely Japanese cultural history and complete with all the references. You don't have to look hard to see the samurai-esque leanings of the Jedi and all of this other stuff in George Lucas's original films and everything that came after. But they went to all of these animation studios and said, here's Star Wars. We're going to let you do some stuff. Go ham. And what you got was, in all the seasons, not just the first one, but what you get in all 3 seasons of Star Wars Visions, is this kind of intense experimentation, this kind of exploration of the wider corners of the Star Wars universe. And you get the advantage that you get when you have a giant lived-in universe you've spent a lot of time and you need to, and a lot of questions have been answered that maybe wouldn't have been answered if it was just the original Star Wars movie from the 70s. And you've really creative animation studios essentially playing in that space. My favorite, the one from The Bride, is animated by the same people who did both Made in Abyss and Rising of the Shield Hero, which I think is fascinating because neither of those shows are anything like the thing they made, which is wild. There's one called The Twins by Trigger. I think there's 2 of them are by Trigger, but the one I'm thinking of is called The Twins by Trigger. There's a whole range of them. And in the second season, what they did was they went to mostly non-anime studios, and there was a little bit of disappointment there. So they restarted up the anime idea with the 3rd season, but all 3 seasons have very cool things in them. But the thing you got with the anime studio's interpretation of Star Wars and of things in Star Wars that weren't even really about Jedi or about these big climactic battles between good and evil. They're about just being in the universe in some cases. There's one where a bunch of kids are in a band and they play for Jabba the Hutt, I'm pretty sure. I forget which episode that is, but that's in the 1st season. And you get you getting Star Wars through a completely different lens of tendencies, stereotypes, cultural norms, all that stuff. And in particular, the episode that this whole season series is based off of, a whole season of streaming season, 8 episodes of anime based off of The Ninth Jedi, was this really contemplative, slow thing that flipped everything on its head as soon as at the end there. And it's also directed by Kenji Kamiyama, who is the director, infamously, of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, which until The Ghost in the Shell this season, which is, if you're not watching this, the current iteration of called The Ghost in the Shell, it's on Amazon Prime if you're in the United States. I don't know if it's on that everywhere else, but if you're in the United States, that's where it is. You should check it out. It's incredible. I'll definitely talk about it here when it wraps. But a thing that Kenji Kamiyama and Production IG did really well with Ghost in the Shell is they gave everything room to breathe. And they used this thing that is this very idea, and it's the idea of what's called Ma. And that is the spaces in between. And that there's spaces, all kinds of entertainment where, or used to be a lot more of them, where nothing's really happening. Where the reason something exists in, where this scene exists, is to kind of vibe and set the atmosphere and set everything up and ground you to whatever you're looking at. And past couple weeks, I've had multiple moments where I wanted more in my media and have really felt the absence of it. So the way I'm going to demonstrate this is actually not with the Jedi. We'll get to that in a second. But I'm going to demonstrate it with the new Spider-Man movie. Because I see that last weekend. And in Spider-Man No Way Home, the one, there were these moments in that movie where the characters are just kind of talking, living in the world. And it ramps up slowly to the crescendo of that movie. By the way, spoiler alert, Spider-Man No Way Home and Spider-Man Brand New Day, if you haven't seen them. Until Spider-Man No Way Home, you get Andrew Garfield and Peter and Tobey Maguire, and you get all three of them in that kind of top of and around this Liberty. But up until then, there's like a quality to that movie. And that's true of the Spider-Man movie before that. And what stuff does is it gives you space to, like, hang out, live with the characters, and, like, with, like, Jay and Peter and Aunt May, and, once again, spoiler alerts for both of those movies. The reason they're doing that is very clearly because Aunt May dies in that movie, and Peter kind of erased himself from everyone who's ever known him, and essentially, like, shunts him off to, like, a life of, like, solitude. Then you get the second movie, and without all the character attachments, there's way less of that, like, crunchy, we're just hanging out for the sake of hanging out. We're using the big screen to show you these teenagers being friends, or in the case of MJ and Peter, being in a romantic relationship, it being a, like, big, real thing. And the movie feels more rushed to me. It feels more... I had this problem with Aang, too. I get this feeling that people making entertainment right now are really concerned with keeping the audience's attention. And what that's doing is getting rid of stuff that is not just unnecessary, it doesn't grab people immediately. Like, what's about Avatar Aang is it grabs you immediately and it tries to keep your attention at all times. There's very little downtime in that. The thing about Spider-Man Brand New Day is it does very much the same thing. And like, ratcheted pretty high for the entire film. The thing about this, the Ninth Jedi series, is it does that to a fault. There is no time for... They take you to a planet, and they spend grand total, like, a half hour on this planet before they, like... I'm going to talk about Ocean's 13 here for a second, because this is a great scene from Ocean's 13. Ocean's 13 is basically until very recently, the last movie in the Ocean's movies. Mostly because Bernie Mac died and they didn't want to get the band back together without the drummer, so to speak. But one of the things that happened in that movie is it's like a night before the heist when they're all staying in the person's whose hotel they're robbing. And I think Brad Pitt goes over to George Clooney's room and he's all jazzed up and they realize that he was screwed with and he's like, "Are you crying?" And then it immediately cuts to the two of them sitting on his hotel bed, lying on George Clooney's hotel bed, trying to logic their way into being okay about watching Oprah give away just houses to poor families, and just sitting there and drinking wine and crying as two grown men watching Oprah. It's so good and so funny and tells you so much about those characters, and it doesn't need to be there at all. There's this tendency towards efficiency that is happening with these shows that are only 8 episodes long, with the movie that is only an hour 40. Or with doing things with movies that should have been done with television shows. And what that efficiency is getting rid of is what allowed Avatar, The Last Airbender, to be such an incredible show. And that is that it had 3 seasons of television of just the 4 shucklefucks of the Avatar, of the gang, just running around that world and being with each other and being with the audience and hanging out and encountering and re-encountering characters. They have enough time to give Sokka 3 meaningful love interests and explore 2 of them completely. Tylee is just off to the side and has a deep crush on him, but he doesn't know what to do with her. And that foundation allowed the film to do what it needs to do more efficiently, because you have the entire foundation of the original Avatar series to inform, this is who Toph is, this is who Aang is, this is Katara, and blah. But I think there's obviously a danger there, and that is when you're working with a property and you don't give the people you give that property to enough leeway. So it feels to me like the original short for The Ninth Jedi, all the other shorts, including The Bride, was really Disney going to all of these dudes and saying, here's this thing, you have access to us for any questions you might have, here are the basic rules of what, Star Wars is. Go. The Last Jedi seemed so up its own ass in terms of Star Wars lore and Star Wars nonsense. At some point, you have a character who dies and turns into a Force ghost, and I just screamed the words midichlorian at the screen because I'm like, this is insane. And they spend so little time allowing the viewer to breathe between action sequences and between plot points that you don't, you're being rickrolled through the entire series until literally, I know it because I clocked it, until episode 6. And episode 6 is the only time when you forget the main character's name, Cara, when you get Cara kind of by herself and hanging out in a way that's forcibly not so about the plot. And even that little bit made the show so much better between that and I think that was when she was with the Hunter, and the episode before was when she had vanished and was on this random planet full of weird half-duck people. But the lack of the spaces in between in this show made it for me feel rushed from start to finish. In a way that was really surprising, because one of the things that you have in Star Wars, because Star Wars is so intrinsically linked to old samurai movies, is you have this space to breathe. You have these scenes where it's just like, George Lucas wanted this world to feel like people live here, so we're going to have to show you some people living here. This is a Star Wars thing that is only concerned with the most top-level parts of the iconography of Star Wars. Lightsabers and Jedi. Not even really the Sith, because there's a Sith character in it, but it did not paced well. But it's also, because it's not paced well, it doesn't feel like you don't feel for the characters as much as you would. Because by the end of everything, you haven't spent a whole lot of time with them, really. And when I say that, you spent 20 minutes an episode over 8 episodes, but none of that time was let's just hang out and catch up and catch our breath and give you time to relax in and understand these characters. It's all constantly under a gun. And that's really difficult to relate to a character in that way. If you think about some of the most popular shonen anime, they're anime with tons of downtime, an absurd amount of downtime. My Hero Academia is the perfect thing. That show spends so much time just hanging out with the characters that they feel, as somebody who recently rifled my way through that entire thing to talk about it on an episode of the podcast that you can go find in whatever feed you're watching or listening to right now. But you spend so much time with those characters, and in that world, that it feels like a warm hug in some ways. And that's a complimentary thing I'm saying there. And it's just, the only way to say it is really, this show needs more space to breathe. And I think that we're getting so much stuff that really had no space to breathe. And even though, yes, the stuff is well written, yes, it can be incredibly well paced, but one of those things, so if you look at the stuff that are mind-blowing successes, they look one way. But if you look at the things that are universally beloved, they look a lot closer to what I'm talking about. For example, Ted Lasso. Tons of people deeply love Ted Lasso. And part of the reason they deeply love Ted Lasso, you show up once a week and you hang out with those characters. Is it the most important, biggest deal in the world? No. But you hang out with those characters, and you follow them around for episode after episode, and that accumulation is worth something. And though, having watched the first, at least 2 seasons, that show has this meandering quality that's not really embraced by a whole lot of stuff anymore. Especially what you get with stuff like this, where it's a limited series, where they only have 8 episodes, and they just spend every inch of that 8 episodes pursuing this story like a dog with a bone, and by episode 3 you're just like, can we pause for 5 seconds and decompress? A tenet of writing entertainment that's hard for people to sit with is you need to give the viewer a release valve of some kind, because you're making a different choice. You're potentially telling the viewer, this is my thing and I want you on tilt. Full stop. I want you to feel that way about this. And I don't think that's intentional here. I don't think that they were willing to pull the camera too far away from, we gotta show lightsabers on screen, we gotta show Jedis on screen, we gotta show the dark side. It felt like they had a checkbox they wanted to tick off. And also they were trying to get the story out. And it's just like, once again, the lack of the idea of the spaces in between. It really surprised me. There's a great, and this is probably where I'll leave it, because it's a great place to leave it. There's a great episode of Answers in Progress, which is one of my favorite YouTube channels, where they try to solve the issue of endless scrolling on the streaming apps. But what they end up, and that's where they start, but what they end up with is the way TV in particular has changed because of streaming. And the fact that you don't have shows where they need to put something on every week no matter what. And so, because after the host of that channel solved her own problem by coding a website, she watched way more than she'd ever watched, but she found herself kind of empty, entertainment-wise, at the end of each show, because it felt like none of it mattered. Because there's no living in any of it, really. I'm not saying that you can't get attached to the characters. I'm not saying you can't get attached to the world. But there's so much less to attach to now than there was, once again, in the era of Avatar: Last Airbender. Or, here's another great example. If you were a young teenager, actually probably younger, 8 to 10, around the same time I was, you had Kids WB, the tail end of Kids WB, and you had shows like Static Shock and Batman Beyond were probably, I think, on at the same time for a period of time. And if you've ever seen either of those shows, they get real preachy sometimes, and they do Static Shock, basically, every 3 episodes. Oh, we haven't addressed the social injustice. Hold my drink. But Batman Beyond did this a little bit, too, with this episode about flappers, which is specifically its version of, that show's version of drugs. But those shows, because they were seasonal, airing every week, weekly seasonal shows, have to be on every single week. For 20 minutes a week, every week, they had to have something in the can. And what that meant was you had teams of writers who were writing the show, and just like some weeks they're like, we gotta slow it down, or else we're gonna run out of road with our storyline here. So they would throw in a random episode that had nothing to do with anything. But what it did do is it gave you time with the characters. I'm thinking about it a lot because I'm rewatching all of Avatar on the lead up of the October release of Seven Havens. But I just got to Tales of Ba Sing Se, which is an incredible episode. And the entire point of that episode is, yes, they end on a story point, but the entire point of that episode is to just tell little snippet stories with each character. Where Sokka gets into a rap battle with a bunch of girls at a haiku club. Toph and Katara hang out at a fancy lady day spa. Aang makes a zoo. The most famous one is the Tale of Iroh, and it's so devastatingly sad because he's finally in Ba Sing Se and goes to visit his son's grave, and it's soul-wrenching. But, once again, that was something that was done because they had to put something on TV at that period for that time slot, and that was the thing they submitted. And that's really a utilitarian way to think about it, but that utilitarian constraint led to people exploring their characters and their worlds much more deeply, because it was like, if they didn't, I'm sure there's a fine, and from at least the FCC, but also the network. And it's a big, with streaming, it drops whenever it drops. It frees up the creative engine to be much smaller and much more efficient, but at the cost of this, like, soulfulness that is in things like Star Wars, the original Star Wars. That is one of the things that people respond to so strongly with anime, because anime is still this, like, multiple episode, season-based thing, and so you get 12 episodes, and episode 6 might be a little weird because they gotta slow it down because they're going too fast, or they want an OVA episode, or something like that, or the Notorious Beach, or Christmas episodes. All of that structure is what gives anime the ability to be a medium that people like me, and you watching this probably, to attach to these worlds and characters. And every time when I've watched an anime that was made shorter because it's an episode order, it's clearly an episode directive from a streaming service. That's what this feels like to me. It feels like these are the directives from Disney Plus based on what they want for their service that don't mesh with the style of storytelling of anime necessarily. And another one is Pacific Rim Black is the same way. It feels rushed, it feels bad, because, once again, it didn't have enough time. But that's where I'm going to leave it. I really wanted this to be really interesting and cool, and I was really disappointed, obviously, when I was like, this is going a mile a minute, and I don't care. So, yeah.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast, and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.